Left Step asks, I recently saw a post saying True X frames are for racing, Squashed X frames are for freestyle, and Dead Cat frames are cinematic. Is that fair or true? Left Step, that's not a crazy thing to say. True X gives the most neutral handling, the most balanced, and the matching behavior on pitch and roll. Squashed X pushes the props backwards while keeping them symmetrical. So the reason Squashed X is quote unquote for freestyle is that freestyle pilots sometimes want to push the props backwards to get them out of view of the GoPro. Okay? So then what about Dead Cat? Dead Cat also pushes the front props back, but is asymmetrical. A Dead Cat layout is like wide props in the front and then V-shaped props in the back, and it's not symmetrical layout. The reason that a Dead Cat is worse for freestyle is that asymmetrical layout means that there is a small amount of coupling between the axes. When you do a roll, snap roll, you'll get a small amount of yaw movement, and the PID controller has to fight that, and some people think they can feel the difference. So, that's where those guidelines come from. Personally, I prefer to fly True X for freestyle. And with enough up tilt on the GoPro, you don't get props in view. Or if there are props in view, I don't care. I kind of like props being a little bit in view. It gives a little bit of a kind of a look to it. Okay. So obviously you can break those rules, but that's where those rules probably come from.
Can I pop in real quick? There's one super relevant question from Diz FPV.
Yeah, go for it.
Are custom motor mixes still relevant with those odd-shaped frames?
Oh, yeah. I see why that's relevant. Yeah, for sure. So Diz FPV is talking about a custom motor mix. And wow, I'm going to guess that a lot of the people watching have never dealt with motor mixes or custom motor mixes. So a motor mix basically tells the flight controller where in space the motor is relative to the center of gravity and which direction the motor is going to push to move the quadcopter. So if you think about it, the flight controller needs to know that motor number 1 is on the left side of the quad and will push the left side of the quad this direction, so that when the flight controller wants to roll the quad that way, it knows that motor number 1 needs to spin faster. You follow? Now, we select standard motor mixes like Quad X, etc. But if you want to, you can make a custom motor mix that tries to compensate for the varying difference. Like if I have a quad with wide rectangle versus a symmetrical rectangle, technically you might want a different motor mix for those. Now, in my opinion, no, custom motor mixes are not relevant. Hang on. That's not the question he asked. So if you have a symmetrical frame, whether it's an X, a squashed X, a stretched X, I don't think you need a custom motor mix. If you were to do a custom motor mix with one of those symmetrical frames, the PID gains would change. Like you might change your PD balance, but at the end of the day, the PID controller is, you're just sort of shuffling the numbers around and it doesn't matter. If you have a symmetrical frame, then just find the right P gains, D gains, etc. for your quad and go fly it. Don't worry about custom motor mixes. But if you have an asymmetrical, here's a great picture from Sunshine in the Discord. Thank you, Sunshine. With an asymmetrical one, a custom motor mix can start to compensate and prevent that coupling of axes. So if you look at this frame, do you see that the front motor is further away from the center of gravity than the rear motor? And that means when we initiate a roll action, one of those arms is going to pull harder and move faster than the other one. And that will induce a small amount of yaw, which then the PID controller will have to notice and react to. But if we put in a custom motor mix, the PID controller will preemptively make one motor speed up slower than the other and prevent that coupling from happening in the first place. And so, in theory, yes, if you care about acro performance and you have a quad that has an asymmetrical arm layout, a custom motor mix can help. But here's the thing. If you care about acro performance, just get a frame that has a symmetrical layout and don't mess with custom motor mixing, is my actual advice. Thank you, Plenty. Thanks for pointing that out. Ciati FPV. Oh, good question, Ciati. Ciati's going to be streaming at 10 after I finish up. Ciati says, continuing the question about motor mixing, wouldn't the PID loop running at 4,000 cycles per second be plenty fast to take care of it? Yeah, so Ciati, the limiting factor there, in my opinion, is the response time of the motors. So the motors themselves can only change speed so fast. So you initiate a snap roll, okay? The flight controller speeds up the two right side motors by the same amount at the same time. The quad begins to roll, and because of the asymmetrical arm layout, it also slightly starts to yaw. The PID controller detects that yaw and begins accruing P and D, and they start accruing. Well, the P and the D don't immediately just jump to a value that fixes the problem. There's a period of time where the uncommanded movement has begun to occur, but the flight controller hasn't responded to it quite yet. And then it has to change the speed of the motors. And if you think about it, it's going to have to change the speed of the motors. One of the motors is going to have to slow down. And that is actually, like, braking is not ultra responsive compared to acceleration. So the PID controller is running at 4,000 hertz or 4 kilohertz, but there are other things that make the response time of the quad slower. And so that's why the motor mixing can make it's a really small effect, for the record. Like, you would barely notice it. Most people, I think, would. What's the point of an asymmetrical frame to begin with? I don't know. Good question. Stop building asymmetrical frames, you boneheads. I don't know. Brandon Bean says, custom motor mixes is really splitting hairs. I never saw it make huge improvements worth doing. I agree. I tried a lot because I was convinced it should, but I couldn't quantify it. I basically agree, Brandon Beans. I mean, even for a frame that is asymmetrical, they're usually not that asymmetrical. It's pretty subtle.